The head lifeguard laughed when the old woman asked to take a shift on the tower. "Ma'am, this isn't a retirement hobby. People's lives depend on this job," he said, loud enough for the whole beach to hear. She didn't argue. She just climbed the tower and sat down to watch the water. 20 minutes later, a rip current pulled 12 swimmers out past the break all at once, and the woman he'd just mocked was already in the water before his own team had finished pulling on their fins. Silver Shoal Beach ran 3 lifeguard towers along its mile-and-a-half of public shoreline, a popular stretch of Atlantic coast known for warm, shallow water most of the summer, and, on certain days when the wind shifted wrong, currents strong enough to pull a grown man out past the point where standing still worked as a strategy. Renee Castellan had walked into the lifeguard station that morning wearing a plain navy one-piece under a faded t-shirt, carrying nothing but a small waterproof bag, and asked the station coordinator if there were any open shifts on the towers. Bryce Halloway, 29, head lifeguard for the past 3 summers and proud of exactly how quickly he'd climbed to that position, looked her over with the specific speed of someone who had already decided what he was looking at. Gray-streaked hair pulled back, a body that had clearly seen more decades than most of his current staff combined, hands with the faint permanent wrinkling of someone who spent a great deal of time in salt water. "Ma'am, this isn't a retirement hobby," Bryce said, not quite unkindly, but not gently either, pitched to carry across the station's open-air briefing area where 6 other guards were finishing their morning stretch routine. "People's lives depend on this job. We need guards who can make a 400-yard swim in under 2 minutes, carrying a board, in real surf conditions." A couple of the younger guards nearby exchanged a look that wasn't quite a laugh, but was adjacent to one. Renee didn't argue. She set her bag down on a bench, opened it, and pulled out a faded certification card, holding it out without a word. Bryce glanced at it, saw a certification date old enough that the card's plastic had yellowed slightly at the corners, and handed it back with the specific patience of someone humoring a request he had no intention of honoring. "This is decades expired," he said. "I can't put you on a tower with a card like this. I'd need current recertification, current fitness testing, current everything." "I understand the position you're in," Renee said. Her voice was even, unbothered. "I'd like to sit in the observation chair on Tower 2 anyway. Not on duty, just watching." One of the younger guards, a college kid named Deacon who'd been half listening while stretching nearby, couldn't quite resist adding his own commentary. "No offense, ma'am, but the water out there doesn't really care how many years you spent lifeguarding at some pool in the 70s. A couple of the others laughed, not cruelly exactly, but with the specific carelessness of young people who had never once needed to seriously reconsider their own assumptions about who around them might actually know something they didn't. Renee looked at Deacon for a moment, the same calm, unhurried attention she gave most things. "Pools don't have currents," she said. "You're right about that much." Deacon didn't have a response ready for that. He went back to his stretching, slightly less certain of himself than he'd been 30 seconds earlier, though he couldn't have explained exactly why. Bryce considered refusing the observation request too, then decided the easier path was simply to let a harmless old woman sit in an unused chair rather than argue about it in front of his entire staff. "Fine," he said. "Observation only. You touch the rescue equipment. We have a problem." "Understood," Renee said, and walked toward Tower 2 without waiting for further permission. If something about this woman's calm is already sitting with you the way it should, this is a good moment to send this video to a friend who needs to see what happens next, because in 20 minutes, everything about that beach is going to change. Renee climbed the wooden tower steps at an unhurried pace and settled into the observation chair beside the tower's actual on-duty guard, a 22-year-old named Priya Adeyemi, who glanced over once, offered a polite half-smile, and went back to scanning the water with the specific, disciplined attention her training had drilled into her. Renee didn't make conversation. She watched the water the way someone watches something they've spent a great deal of their life reading, her eyes tracking patterns in the surf that had nothing obviously alarming about them yet. The particular way certain sandbars created backwash channels that most swimmers never noticed until the current had already pulled them 50 yards past where they'd meant to be standing. The morning crowd built steadily. Families staked out umbrellas along the tide line. A group of teenagers tossed a football near the shore break. Further out, past the second sandbar, a cluster of 12 swimmers, mostly a extended family group celebrating someone's birthday, had drifted into deeper water than any of them had quite noticed drifting into, caught up in the specific communal carelessness of people enjoying themselves on a beautiful day. Renee's eyes had been on that cluster for almost 10 minutes before anything visibly changed. "There," she said quietly, pointing. Priya followed her finger, scanning the water. "I don't see anything unusual. The color's wrong, 40 yards past where they're standing. Darker water, moving faster than the water around it. That's an outflow channel opening up. When it fully opens, it's going to pull that entire group straight out past the second bar before any of them understand what's happening to them." Priya studied the water a moment longer, uncertain. "That's not in any of our current pattern training. We're taught to watch for visible rip indicators, foam lines, color breaks close to shore, not dash." The water changed exactly the way Renee had described. All at once, the darker channel widening and accelerating with the specific violence of a current finding its full strength. The cluster of 12 swimmers, laughing and splashing a moment earlier, went from casual to panicked in the space of about 4 seconds, several of them realizing simultaneously that the sand beneath their feet had vanished and the shore was receding at a rate their own swimming couldn't counter. Priya's whistle went to her mouth immediately, 3 sharp blasts, the emergency signal that brought every guard on the beach to instant attention. She grabbed the tower's rescue can and started down the ladder, radioing the other towers as she moved. Renee was already in the water. She hadn't waited for the whistle. She'd read the current a full 4 seconds before it fully opened, and by the time Priya's first blast sounded, Renee had already covered 30 yards of open water in a stroke that had nothing recreational left in it at all. The specific economical power of someone who had swum distances measured in miles rather than yards, in conditions considerably less forgiving than a warm Atlantic morning. Bryce, sprinting down from the main station with a rescue board under one arm, saw the old woman already 100 yards offshore and felt something cold drop through his stomach that had nothing to do with the water temperature. He'd run this beach for 3 summers. He knew, with the specific certainty of professional experience, exactly how fast a trained guard could cover open water in a genuine emergency, and what he was watching didn't match anything in that certainty. Renee moved through the water with an economy that read less like exertion and more like something closer to fluency. The specific stroke pattern of someone whose body had internalized open water distance so completely that thought no longer factored into the motion at all. Subscribe. Actually, forget that for a second. Just keep watching, because what Renee does over the next 4 minutes is something every guard on that beach will still be describing to new recruits for years. Renee reached the outer edge of the panicking cluster first, a full 30 seconds ahead of the nearest other guard, and immediately began doing something that looked, to everyone watching from shore, less like a rescue and more like an assessment conducted at terrifying speed. She grabbed the nearest swimmer, a teenage boy flailing hard enough to be actively dangerous to himself, wrapped one arm across his chest in a crossbody carry, and shouted instructions to the others in a voice that cut through the panic with the specific clarity of someone who had given orders in conditions far worse than this one. "Stop swimming toward shore," she called out. "The current's stronger than you are. You'll exhaust yourselves fighting it. Swim parallel to the beach, toward the pier. The channel narrows there. You'll be out of it in 30 seconds. Most of them didn't listen immediately, panic overriding instruction the way it usually does. Renee didn't waste time repeating herself to anyone who wasn't in front of her. She towed the teenage boy in a controlled lateral path exactly as she'd just described, demonstrating the escape route with her own body rather than continuing to explain it. And 2 of the more level-headed swimmers in the group began following her line almost immediately. Priya arrived next, rescue can deployed, pulling a middle-aged woman who'd stopped actively swimming entirely, floating in the specific stillness of someone whose body had started shutting down under the strain. Bryce arrived 30 seconds after that, breathing hard from the sprint and swim combined, and found himself, for the first time in 3 years running that beach, taking directions from someone he'd told an hour earlier that she didn't belong on a tower. "Get the ones closest to the pier first," Renee called to him, already turning back toward the remaining swimmers still caught in the main channel. "The current narrows there, easier extraction point. I'll take the 2 furthest out." Bryce didn't argue. He redirected. following her instruction without pausing to reconsider the source of it, because something about the specific competence in her voice made second-guessing feel, in that moment, like a luxury nobody in the water could afford. Renee reached the two furthest swimmers, a father and his young daughter, who drifted deepest into the channel, the father's arms already shaking with the specific fatigue of someone who had been fighting a current for 2 straight minutes with a panicking child clinging to his neck. Renee got an arm under the girl first, prying her gently but firmly loose from her father's neck, redistributing the weight in a way that let both of them breathe properly for the first time since the current had opened. "You're doing everything right," Renee told the father, her voice steady, carrying no trace of the exertion her body was clearly under. "Stop fighting it straight on. Angle with me, toward the pier. We're almost through the worst of it." The full rescue took just under 4 minutes from the moment the current opened to the moment the last swimmer's feet found solid sand again. For minutes that felt, to everyone on the beach watching, considerably longer. The specific elastic quality that time takes on when a dozen lives are visibly, immediately at stake. All 12 swimmers made it back to shore. Nobody drowned. Nobody required hospitalization beyond routine observation for saltwater ingestion and exhaustion. Renee walked out of the surf last, breathing hard but steady, her wet hair plastered flat against her skull, and found the entire beach staring at her in a silence that had replaced the earlier morning noise almost completely. Bryce approached her slowly, still catching his own breath, his earlier dismissiveness entirely gone, replaced by something closer to disbelief. "That current," he said. "You called it 4 seconds before it opened. Our training doesn't teach anyone to read water like that." "Most training doesn't," Renee said. "It teaches you to react to a rip current once it's visible. I learned to read the water before it decides to become one." "Where?" Bryce asked. "Where does someone learn that?" Renee considered the question for a long moment, the specific measured consideration of someone deciding exactly how much of an answer the situation actually required. "A long time ago," she said. "In conditions I don't talk about much anymore, doing work that isn't exactly public record." Priya, standing nearby wrapped in a rescue blanket she'd grabbed for the shivering teenage boy rather than herself, looked between Renee and Bryce with an expression caught somewhere between awe and total reassessment of everything she thought she understood about who belonged on a lifeguard tower. "You swam that distance faster than I've seen anyone swim it in training," she said. "And you were towing someone the entire way. Distance stops feeling long once you've swum it enough times that your body forgets to be tired," Renee said. "It's not talent. It's repetition in conditions that don't give you the option of quitting partway through." The father of the young girl Renee had pulled from the channel approached next, still shaking slightly from the adrenaline crash, his daughter clinging to his side wrapped in a towel someone had brought down from the station. He didn't say anything elaborate. He simply extended his hand, and when Renee took it, he held on a beat longer than a normal handshake required. "I don't know how to thank someone for that," he said. "You don't need to," Renee said. "Get her somewhere warm. Watch her for shock symptoms the rest of the day, even if she seems fine now." He nodded, still holding her hand a moment longer, then finally let go and led his daughter up the beach toward the parking lot, glancing back once before they disappeared behind a row of umbrellas. Bryce spent the next 20 minutes on the radio with the county emergency services coordinator, reporting the rescue in the careful, procedural language required for an incident that had involved 12 simultaneous water rescues on a public beach. When the coordinator asked who had led the initial response, Bryce hesitated only slightly before answering honestly. "A civilian volunteer," he said. "Former certification expired, but she read the current before any of my trained staff saw it developing. I need you to understand that whatever she used to do, it wasn't recreational." The coordinator asked for a name. Bryce gave it. There was a pause on the other end of the line long enough that Bryce checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "Say that name again," the coordinator said finally. Bryce repeated it. Another pause, longer this time. "I'm going to need you to keep her at that location," the coordinator said. "Someone's going to want to speak with her directly, and I don't have the authority to explain why over this line." Bryce found Renee sitting on the tower steps an hour later, wrapped in a towel, watching the ocean with the same patient attention she'd carried since the morning, the beach around her slowly returning to its ordinary rhythm as families resumed their afternoon and lifeguards resumed their rotations with a new, quieter carefulness in how they scanned the water. "They're sending someone," Bryce said, sitting down a respectful distance away. "For you. County Emergency Services made some calls after I gave them your name." "I imagine they might," Renee said, unsurprised. "Who are you?" Bryce asked. Not accusatory this time. Genuinely curious. The specific curiosity of a man whose entire professional confidence had been quietly and thoroughly recalibrated over the course of one morning. "Someone who spent a long time in water considerably less forgiving than this beach," Renee said. "Deep water, at night, in conditions built specifically to kill anyone who didn't know exactly what they were doing. I got very good at reading currents, because reading them wrong meant not coming back." "Military," Bryce said. "A specific kind," Renee said. "The kind that doesn't show up in most personnel records anymore, because the operations it supported weren't the kind anyone wanted officially documented. I retired from that a long time ago. I came to this beach today because I missed the water, and because a friend told me the current patterns here reminded her of somewhere I used to work. I didn't expect to need any of it again." "But you were ready anyway," Bryce said. "You're always ready," Renee said. "That part doesn't retire, even when everything else does." A government sedan arrived at the parking lot 40 minutes later, unremarkable except for the specific, unhurried authority of the two people who got out of it, a man and a woman, both in plain civilian clothes that somehow still read as uniforms despite carrying no visible insignia at all. They crossed the sand directly toward Renee without needing directions from anyone. The woman, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, stopped a few feet from the tower steps and studied Renee for a long moment before speaking. "Commander Castellan," she said, "we were told you retired to the coast. We didn't realize you retired to actual lifeguard duty." "I retired to sitting on a beach," Renee said. "The rest just happened. 12 simultaneous rescues," the woman said. "Current pattern recognition 4 seconds ahead of visible indicators. That's not retirement behavior, Commander. It's also not something I did on purpose," Renee said. "I was watching the water. The water needed watching. I did what I was built to do a long time ago and never really stopped being built to do." The woman considered that, something in her composed expression softening slightly. "We've had your name flagged for consultation work for the past 2 years," she said. "Coastal rescue protocol development. Training programs for exactly the kind of current pattern recognition you just demonstrated in front of an entire beach full of witnesses. We assumed you weren't interested, given how thoroughly you disappeared from every channel we usually use to reach people like you." "I wasn't interested," Renee said, "in going back to rooms with fluorescent lighting and people who wanted to debrief me about things I'd already spent years trying to stop thinking about." She looked out at the water, at the ordinary afternoon rhythm of a beach that had nearly lost 12 people that morning and had, instead, gotten all 12 of them back. "But I could teach guards to read a current before it opens. That part, I think I could actually do." The woman studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "We'll leave you a number," she said. "No pressure attached to it. Just an option, if today changed anything about how you're thinking about all this." She left a card on the tower step, the two of them returning to their sedan with the same unhurried pace they'd arrived with, pulling out of the parking lot without ceremony. Bryce picked up the card after they'd gone, turned it over once, and set it back down exactly where it had been. "Would you actually consider it?" he asked. "Training guards. Here, I mean, not wherever they were talking about." Renee looked at the ocean for a long moment, at the tide line where a family was rebuilding a sandcastle the morning's chaos had briefly interrupted, at Priya walking the shoreline, doing an extra sweep nobody had asked her to do, checking the water with a new, quieter attentiveness that hadn't been there the day before. "Tuesdays," Renee said finally. "I could do Tuesdays. Not officially, just showing up, the way I did this morning." "Tuesdays works," Bryce said. She came back the following Tuesday, and the one after that, and within 2 months, Silver Shoals guards were running current pattern drills that hadn't existed anywhere in their standard training manual, developed entirely by a woman most of them still knew only as Renee, who taught with the same unhurried, exacting patience she'd shown pulling 12 strangers out of open water on an ordinary Thursday morning. Deacon, the young guard who'd made the comment about pools, ended up in her very first Tuesday session, arriving early and staying late. absorbing every correction with the specific hunger of someone who had discovered, in the span of one terrifying morning, exactly how much he still had to learn about a job he'd assumed he already understood well. He never brought up his earlier comment, and Renee never mentioned it either, though he noticed, months later, that she seemed to watch his progress with a particular attentiveness she didn't extend quite as visibly to anyone else, and he suspected, without ever asking, that she remembered exactly what he'd said that first morning and had simply decided it was worth more to correct than to hold against him. Priya became, within a year, the most technically proficient current reader on the entire beach, a skill that spread quietly through the county's other lifeguard stations as guards transferred in and out, until Silver Shoal's informal training methods had become, without any official designation, the regional standard that other beaches sent their own guards to observe. Bryce never brought up the government sedan again, and Renee never explained further what Commander had meant, or what conditions had taught her to read a current for seconds before anyone else's eyes could catch it. Some questions, he'd learned, over that one extraordinary morning, weren't actually his to keep asking. If this story kept you here until the very last word, that's usually a sign it's worth passing along. Some of the most important people in any room are the ones everyone else already decided weren't worth a second look, right up until the moment the water proves otherwise.